Hello, this is Introspection with Jeff. I'm Jeff. I know I have a few red marks. It's nothing. I was shaving, and I tend to shave close, so that's why that's there. I learned that I just started my YouTube channel yesterday, um, and I learned that I fortunately have uploaded enough video or something to enable me to make longer videos, so I won't feel that I have to cut them off at 15 minutes. And I even learned how to add chapters, so you may see, you should be seeing chapter markers at the bottom of the screen, which will help because I want to talk about a certain topic. It's about my experience through Judaism and growing up, upbringing, and my take on the Bible, which is something that I feel people don't really understand, and I just have this impression that it would go way, that they just go, I don't understand, and they just immediately block off. So maybe doing this video will be different. Will give me a chance to explain everything, and I don't feel under pressure. All right, so at the beginning, I didn't know that I was Jewish until close to my bar mitzvah. Again, I've been living with my mom. I'd been living with my mom. My dad was Catholic, and I remember when I was living in Binghamton with my mom. This would have been like 1983. I remember when one time my dad visited, and he took me to a Catholic mass, and my mom was very perturbed about that. But aside from that, as I remember, I didn't know I was Jewish until my mom and I were walking down the street here in Liverpool, New York, and it would have been like 1988, something like that. And she told me that I'm Jewish, that I'd have to start bar mitzvah practice soon. And I remember my first reaction being no, because that would, at the time, I felt a bit ostracized in school, and I didn't know much about Judaism. I knew that like Jews were, and at some level, not part of the mainstream. So I thought, as I recall, I thought they that's another thing that would make me not fit in with everybody else. So I I had to, before learning how to chant chant in the Torah, the Bible, for my bar mitzvah, I had to learn. I had to go meet with somebody, I think weekly, to learn how to read Hebrew. Let me explain what all this means. As part of a bar mitzvah, well, first of all, a bar mitzvah literally means son of mitzvah, which is literally translates in Hebrew like this. Tzava means a connection or a bond, and mitzvah means an active condition of there being a bond. So it's usually translated as commandment, but one of my pet peeves is English translations of Hebrew words, which I think totally screws up people's understanding of what the actual Torah says, and that's part of the entire point of this video. So it means son of bar, son of this connection, and it's a connection between the Jewish deity and I'll just say God, even though it's more complex. Thank goodness, it's more complex than that in the Bible, than just simply God. It's a connection between God and the Son. You being a son. You are taking on the commandments. You are taking on responsibility for for upholding the commandments. This is traditionally done for a boy at age 13 and a day. For girls, for a bat, meaning daughter, bat mitzvah, it's 12 years and a day. So on the Friday night, Saturday morning, meaning Shabbat, that Shabbat is a day of rest. Shabbat begins Friday evening. Traditionally, when you can see 3 stars in the night sky, that signals evening. And so it's Friday evening to Saturday evening. That's Shabbat. And there are services. There's a Friday night service and then a Saturday morning service, which makes me think I must have done 2 services. Anyway, instead of just the one. And part of the service, the rabbi opens up the Torah scroll to that particular portion for that week. All the Jews around the world read a certain portion, the same portion, for that particular week. And it goes from Genesis at the beginning of the Jewish year to Deuteronomy at the end of the Jewish year. Beginning of the Jewish year being around September or October, because the Jewish calendar and the Christian calendar don't always coincide. Independently, they each are consistent, but the number of days in the Jewish calendar, the number of days in the Christian calendar aren't the same. In the Jewish calendar, it's 30 days, 31 every other month, 30 days, and then 31 days, and then 30 days, and then 31 days. Whereas the Christian calendar fluctuates a bit. Like sometimes there are a few months with 31 days. So anyway, the beginning of the year begins around with the Rosh Hashanah, which literally means head of the year or beginning of the year, and around September, October. So that's when you start reading the first portion of Genesis and then onward, each portion. So my portion was Life of Sarah, which ironically, it's named that because those are the first significant words in the Torah portion. Just like Genesis is not named Genesis in Judaism when they refer to that scroll, the scroll of Genesis, they refer to it as Breshit because that's the first word in the scroll, and that goes back to Babylonian tradition that you name the text by the first word or the first significant word. So Genesis is known in Judaism as Breshit, literally meaning in or when beginning. Doesn't mean necessarily in the beginning. It means it's in a condition. It's in a certain. It's in a form of the word that means like when beginning or upon beginning. Then Exodus is known in Judaism as Shemot, meaning names, as in these are the names. And then Leviticus is known in Judaism. I know it starts with a Vav. Vayikra, and he called. I may be confusing that with Numbers, which also begins with a Vav, which means and. And he, I think both of them may be and he something. And he called, and the other one, and he something. And Deuteronomy has another name. It's Devarim, which means things or words. Anyway, my portion was the life of Sarah, which ironically begins with her death, and it gives the number of years in her life. It's a funny story that decades later, this is my bar mitzvah was in 1990, and then in 2002, 2000 something or other, they opened up the scroll. Happened to be that particular scroll, and they started reading from it. And I was there, and we were in the smaller chapel for a Saturday morning service, and there was a post-it note stuck, and she reasoned it must have been from my bar mitzvah way back. So she asked me if I wanted it, and yeah, sure, I took it. I still probably have it somewhere. Okay, so anyway, this is like 1988. So I probably began Sunday school close to this time, and I believe so. And in addition to that, I had to do extra. I had to meet with one woman in particular who I would go to another classroom alone with her, and she would teach me how to read the Torah. She started with the alphabet, and she wanted to make sure that I knew what I was reading. Of course, I was in my early teens, and I had no idea what I was reading. In fact, when I went to the Torah during the bar mitzvah, I chanted what I remembered, like a song, like I remembered the song, and I moved my pointer along on the scroll as I was just chanting. Anyway, so I learned a bit of Hebrew, and I learned the alphabet. And then I went to a different woman who was more of a cantor. I actually would go, this was maybe Saturday morning or Sunday, probably Saturday. No, it would not have been Saturday morning. It would have been, well, anyway, my mom and I would take a special bus trip because she didn't have a car. Would go all the way over to her house. This is a different woman again. And she taught me how to chant. It may have been the cantor of the temple. And this is like 1989, and I really needed to learn how to chant it well because my bar mitzvah was coming up November 1990, and as I recall, my impression of it looking back is that I had catch-up learning. I didn't know I was Jewish until then, so I felt more, I was going to Sunday school with kids who probably always knew that they were Jewish, and they were brought up in a Jewish home, and they had Jewish kids and so forth. Actually, at that temple, the kids lived in manliest and ritzier areas, like, to me, wealthier areas of Syracuse, and I felt like an outsider because I had to take 2 buses to go with my mom to go all the way down there and all the way back, whereas they just probably lived nearby, so they either walked or they probably had their parent just drive them over there and drive back. So maybe I'll get into this in a future video, but I always felt like an outsider, like I didn't fit in quite. Like I always it always felt like they were wealthier, and that continued on through just going to temple in general. That they seemed wealthier and they had more resources, and they could take plane trips or vacations when they wanted, and they had like 2 cars, and they had like high finance. They invest in the stock market. Who knows? They just seemed more comfortable and so forth. No, not necessarily more comfortable, but they just had more materialistically. It's the best way of putting it. Whereas I was more thoughtful and more philosophical, and I don't want to say more philosophical. It seemed I got an impression like I valued the education I was getting more, and I was more it seemed like I was more thoughtful than the other students. So I had my bar mitzvah, and as I said in another video, that was the one time, almost the only time, that my uncle came actually to participate in something I was involved in. Then in 1990 was the end of 8th grade and the beginning of 9th grade. And I remember during high school, I'm a Star Trek fan. I had been a Star Trek fan by that point anyway. I felt like Spock. I could sympathize with Spock in feeling like part of an alien culture and having to work in a non-Jewish environment, like namely school. And I remember sometimes my mom saying that if Jews actually ran things, it would be more ethical and moral. And I developed a pride. Very quickly, I felt very proud to be Jewish, which is ironic considering at the beginning I felt shocked that when she told me I was Jewish to begin with. I wasn't very learned. I at the time in high school, I don't think any kid would really be that well learned about their religion in their teens. But I knew some things, and I was very proud of those things. I was proud to be Jewish. Then college, I went to college and I wanted to go. I took 2 semesters. I remember taking 2 semesters of Hebrew, and partly I wanted to meet some Jewish girl, and that never happened. And I even went to the Hillel chapel, which the Heinrichs chapel. Hillel is a Jewish. I don't want to get into that, but there are Jewish services held, obviously, in universities, and I'd nickname it Hillel. So I would go to some of those Friday night services, and that didn't pan out all that much. I did meet one girl, but I don't even remember what happened. It didn't last long. We didn't even really get involved. I just like gave her a note, and she replied back kindly, like not even friendship really, just like acquaintances meeting. That's about it. So after college, I went off to try and get work, and I just went on with my life. And then I graduated in August '99, and then in 2002, it was after September 11th. Sometime in 2002, I came back to Temple because I talked with my mom. My mom and I had a relationship, very close, deep relationship. And I told her that I felt lonely. I want to date. I want to find a Jewish girlfriend. And she said that she had read about a singles group that they had at the temple. So I went there. I didn't find any singles group, but I did start going back to temple. The services Saturday morning, well, there's Friday night service and there's Saturday morning service. The Friday night service was in the evening. It was just that service alone. And then in terms of Jewish tradition, afterwards you eat bread and you drink wine, and sometimes there are other, like ice cream, like sherbet ice cream, floats, something like that. There are sort of other candies, not other treats. And then Saturday morning, this temple had a Torah study, and then for an hour, and then a half Torah study for the next hour. And then at 11 o'clock in the morning would be the actual service. I enjoyed those two studies. They're not. I haven't been to a Christian Bible study group, but I would say that the Torah study. I'll just describe what this Torah study is like, and I think this is like many Jewish study groups are like. It was done not by the head rabbi, the primary rabbi of the temple. It was performed. They were moderated by a para-rabbi who had been studying to become a rabbi, and actually he was a convert from Christianity. As I understand it, it had begun with the primary rabbi, but it had been continued by the para-rabbi. So typically, you would come in. They're in the library. Jews go to the library, and one of the commandments is to visit the houses of study. So it seems normal to have a study group in the library, in the temple library. We would gather around a large table, and there'd be regulars coming, and the rabbi would open up to this week's portion and simply ask. I think after a while, we didn't even start reading. He just simply asked, "Does anyone have anything interesting that they caught from reading the portion?" And my mom had actually bought a good copy of a Bible, which had on each page, one page would have the English, very good, a pretty good translation. On the other side would be the actual Hebrew, not only with the Hebrew, but with the cantillation marks to indicate how you should chant the line, and had the vowels. And what I liked about the English translation was that it didn't say Moses, it didn't say Aaron. It said it gave a transliteration of the Hebrew names. And as I understand it, from what I read, unfortunately, I think it said that the English translation was taken from the NIV or some other modern translation of it. But I noticed that in many cases, when the para-rabbi would ask, "Well, what do other people have for their translations?" We didn't all have the same book. We brought different different books, copies that we had, and they would have different translations. Mine seemed to be closer to the actual Hebrew. And that's a pet peeve of mine, understanding the Hebrew and actually having an English translation that matches the Hebrew rather than what's customarily been an English translation. I don't want a customarily translated version. I want to know what the actual Hebrew says. So I bring that every week, and so that began around 2002, and then 2010 for reasons I guess I won't go into right now. I stopped going, and by that point, well, I was getting a ride from somebody, and for certain reasons, the person didn't show up and decided not to keep driving me over there. I think he had issues himself, but we got along well. I think it was with my mom, but by that point, I reasoned I'm not really getting anything out of this Torah study, and actually, it's feeling like detrimental actually, because I found that as I would go and I would try and participate and offer new insights into it, which weren't that off the wall, and if I were in a more learned study group, if I were in the name escapes me, but well, okay, I'll tell you what a traditional, very Jewish group would be like. These were not the most Jewish observant, I would hazard to guess. people. In a very Jewish study group, each member is called if I have this right, chavura, which means it's like a friendship bond. It's a companion. I guess companion may be the best term. And you're encouraged to, you're both studying the same portion of the same verse. It doesn't have to be just the Torah. It could be the Talmud or Mishnah, Talmud or Kabbalah, so forth. You're encouraged to debate and to discuss and bring up other points of view, and actually, well, I said debate actually because that's important. Actually, debate and discuss. It's not just both of you agreeing and going on to the next part. There's a Jewish joke that if you get two Jews together, you'll get three opinions. So if I were in a group like that, I think I would feel better and more. I would feel I was getting more out of the group. But I found that after a while, when I would bring up these things, nobody else seemed to know what I was talking about, even though I was bringing up things that were common mainstream in Kabbalah, and in other texts that rabbis had written and commented on, written about in their commentaries. So at this point, I didn't have a routine ride over there. And I questioned whether I was really getting anything out of the Torah study. I wasn't. And I should backtrack a bit and mention what sect I had grown up in. I grew up in Reform. As I understand in history, Jews had been either observant or non-observant. And in Germany in the 1800s, there was a Jewish movement that sprung up called the Reform Movement, and they decided. It's not like a monolith, but like the movement sprung up from a sense of modernization and a sense that we want to fit in. There was probably anti-Semitism there at the time, and would have been a reaction to it. We want to fit in. We don't want to be ostracized. Number one. Number two, sense of modernization. A sense that these commandments don't necessarily pertain either entirely or the way they're written to modern life. And so they developed, I guess later on, they modeled some Episcopalian dress code and so forth into the Reform movement. So, as I understand it, my impression is, as a reaction to that, there were Jewish groups that became more orthodox. So that's how you get saying that we want to retain our culture and retain these important traditions. So you have two extremes. You have Reform, which is liberal, and you have Orthodox. And then at some point, I believe perhaps in the 20th century, I think, there was a middle ground, which I think actually my impression is it kind of leans towards Orthodox, called conservative, right in the middle. And then there's something called conservadox, which I don't know what that is exactly. So those are, and then even more recently, there's something called Reconstructionist Judaism, which I think could exist in Judaism. I don't know about Christianity, a version of it in Christianity, but in Judaism, you could have it, works just fine. In fact, in some sense, I think a lot of Jewish people have this sentiment. But the Reconstructionist movement says that we don't necessarily believe in the spirituality aspect, that there is a divine being or that there is a divine presence, but these traditions are important enough, and we are a culture of Judaism, and that's very healthy. So that's where the Reconstructionist movement is. I hope I have these. And if anybody wants to give feedback, I'm open to reading in the comments section. But you have these, though these are the primary movements, and then Orthodox splinters into several different Orthodox sects. It's interesting. I found that the more left-leaning and liberal-leaning, the fewer small little, the fewer splinter movements there are. So I grew up in the Reform movement, and as I grew, I was about college age and then post-college age, I learned more about Hebrew and more about the religion, and I didn't like the fact that in the past, and in the older members of the temple didn't know Hebrew that well, didn't know some aspects of the religion that well. So I felt more kinship to just Judaism in general, and I never felt myself as Reform. It didn't seem to pertain to me at all. I always just felt Jewish. And this is my heritage. And knowing Hebrew, and knowing the traditions, and knowing the commandments, and the texts, and Kabbalah. I should mention Kabbalah, how I began studying that. I should backtrack a little bit. During college, 1996, I saw this 3-part documentary called Pharaohs and Kings by David Rohl, and it was essentially a promotion. It was based on his book, Pharaohs and Kings. And his idea was that our accepted Egyptian timeline is skewed and off track by like 2 or 3 centuries, because of faulty misimpressions, trying to link the Hebrew Bible with markers that they found in Egyptian texts. And so if you make false equations between, like, this person is really this person in the Bible, or this event refers to this, and you're off, you could have artificially added in several centuries when you think something happened here when it really happened down here. I hope that's clear. So I found that fascinating, and I didn't know that much about the biblical stories, so it was very informative for me. Since then, I have my own take on, I think, what was going on. Now it was in 1996, exactly right halfway through my college life. So that's when I began even further in-depth study of the Bible. That's when I began really looking into the Bible and being curious and remembering different things mentioned, retaining knowledge of different things mentioned. Kabbalah, I don't know exactly when. It was probably about that time that I started learning Kabbalah, and it was online. I didn't go to any formal training. It was purely online research. And Kabbalah, first of all, is another pet peeve of mine. Kabbalah comes from a Hebrew word, kaval, which, as I remember, as I translate it, if I'm translating it correctly, it means send, I believe. It has a notion of something being passed down from generation to generation. This is received, I think it means receive. Maybe now I'm closer to thinking it means receive. I don't normally speak Hebrew, so it's the connotation of traditions and knowledge being received from an earlier generation. It goes as Judaism tends to be. It talks about Judaism tends to talk about like traditions going way, way, way back and passed down from generation to generation, faithfully passed down, and a concerted effort to make sure that it's passed down well and accurately. In fact, when a scroll scribe copies a scroll, there are traditions about determining whether the scroll should be kept as accurate and so forth. If the scribe makes an error, there's certain things he can wipe out. He cannot wipe out the name of God. I suppose a new scroll has to be used, but he cannot scratch off the name of God. Even though some scribes in the past have done that. And you would bury the scroll. There's probably a ceremony involved in burying the scroll. There's another guideline that if you can find a person who doesn't speak Hebrew and he compares and sees there's no difference between the original and the version that you copied, the version that you created as a copy, then that's a good test whether you've copied it faithfully. So there are traditions to make sure that it's kept, that the information is kept accurate. Let me see. Kabbalah. Kabbalah it's translated or described sometimes as Jewish mysticism. I don't like that. I guess I could see how that could relate. I'll just describe there are certain famous primary Kabbalistic texts. There's the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, the Book of Illumination, and one that's like an encyclopedia long text whose name escapes me right at the moment. I should have written these things down. It's I would say the third primary text mentioned in Kabbalah. And they're not all, it's not like a Bible where they're all put together in one book. There are different texts, but they all have something in common. As being Kabbalah, they explain the nature of divinity. They don't give commandments. That's not part of it. And they don't give a history lesson. That's not the point. They're explaining the nature of divinity, whether it's divine being or the nature of the universe, or the nature of the human soul or humanity. They give it in the text. The Kabbalistic text would give it in kind of cloaked manner, as if you can follow what it's saying, but it's not very explicit in how it's expressed. It's all in the expression. It's not very explicit in how it's expressed. It'll say, in some weird way, like the Sefer Yetzirah will say that God... All right, I won't mention Sefer Yetzirah. I'll just mention hypothetically a text. It would say like, the Divine One, blessed be He, placed one aspect of the human soul to the east and another to the west, and He placed the letter A or Aleph to the north, and He blessed it, and he crowns it. And you're reading it and you can follow, and there's probably something behind it. There's probably some kind of mechanism or concept behind it, but it takes a lot to understand what the overall picture is. And that's what really motivates me whenever I study something. That's what really motivates me. With the overall concept and understanding how everything fits together. So I guess I'm very Kabbalistic in my instincts. It takes a lot of study, and I'm sure somebody has said at one point, if you think you know Kabbalah, you're deluding yourself. You can't understand all of Kabbalah. You can be I guess it's like, in a crude sense, maybe it's like medicine or like a practice of study. You can't really be the master of it, know all of it. It's a lifetime of study. So in Jewish schools, even in adults, it's an ongoing study. They're Jewish schools. They're like, just like Christians have Christian school. There are Jews that have Jewish school, and the name escapes me. It's not just Hebrew school or Sunday school. The name escapes me, where you go to strictly a Jewish school and study with other Jews. They would study lots of texts. They would be brought up on Talmud, and then I imagine later on they would be brought up on Kabbalah, and they would know the Torah. They would know the Tanakh. The Tanakh is a longer form beyond just the Bible, just beyond just the Torah. I should mention what these books are. The Torah refers to the 5 books of Moses, Genesis to Deuteronomy, and then I guess what Christians would call their Bible, aside from the Christian part that was added later, the Jewish part of the Christian Bible, essentially, that's what Jews refer to as the Tanakh. It's an acronym. T for Torah, Ne for Nevi'im, which means prophets. Actually, it doesn't mean prophet in the sense of telling the future. It means prophet, meaning a messenger giving a divine revelation or divine message. And Chotavim, meaning writings. So altogether, the acronym is Tanakh. So they would be brought up on Tanakh, I'm sure. They would have to be at a very young age. And then Talmud, I would say about 2,000 years ago, give or take. The head of the Supreme Court, essentially the Supreme Court in Israel, composed a 6-part, meaning 6-part list of traditions called the Mishnah. And I want to get into that later on in another video. I wanted to get into, it relates to part of what I wanted to get into in this video, but this has already been going on for almost 44 minutes. Maybe I'll cut off at the 1 hour mark. He composed the Mishnah, and then later on, there were commentaries by other rabbis added on. So altogether, it became known as the Talmud. So that's what the Talmud is. It doesn't contradict Torah, as some people spread that rumor. All Jewish texts refer back to the Torah as a source, as a primary source. Let me see. So you have, I don't remember where I was. So Kabbalah. So I became more interested in Kabbalah and more interested in the Bible post-college. and I found that I didn't have as much connection. I wasn't getting enough the way I wanted to from that Torah study in the morning. So I just continued on my own, considering myself as a Jew, wanting to find someone Jewish, a girlfriend who's Jewish, a woman to be a girlfriend who's Jewish, and wanting to live a Jewish life. So I've gone back to the temple on some high holy days. But at this point, I haven't gone to temple. And then COVID happened. As I understand it, the building still exists. Even though it's been sold, they're still holding services there, and it awaits approval from the city, something like that. The sale awaits approval from the city, and it's just to me it feels like a long drawn out thing, which is kind of good because I don't want to see that temple done away with. It's lasted a long time. It's a temple I grew up. It's really the only temple I've known that's familiar to me, and one I grew up in. So what I wanted to do was talk about my upbringing and then explain my concept of the Bible and about God, and how that's different from the mainstream conception that people have of God, even amongst Jews. I find it's very unique, and I'm glad that if I'm correct about the sources, what inspired me to look at this and get this conception were two websites, and I guess I'll be breaking this up into two videos. Two websites, and I'll think through whether I want to mention what those two websites are, but they were both referring specifically to lines in the Torah text, and sometimes in Kabbalah, texts of Kabbalah. I'm very proud of that. I hope they're accurate. It seems that they're accurate because, in some sense, as a scientist, I actually check out these sources and I check to confirm if there are other alternative explanations. There's one website, one of the two websites is chaver.com. It's CHAVER.com. And the other had been run by Stan Tenen, TENEN. And it's called meru.com or meru.org. I believe it's meru.org, MERU. And I'm running out of breath at this point. I want to take a little bit of a break, and I'll come back and explain my concept of Judaism that I've gotten from these two sources.